Punch magazine began in 1841 and grew to be very influential, selling 40,000 copies per week. So, by viewing Punch cartoons, we get a look into British popular thought. While earlier Punch cartoons about America focused on slavery, over time there was a shift to satirizing the United States. And importantly, Punch insisted that the people of Britain wanted no part in America's war. They critiqued both sides of the war, as seen in the comic here, The American Twins, or North and South, as well as in Ode to the North and South, which I'll read a brief excerpt. "O Jonathan and Jefferson, come listen to my song. I can't decide my word upon which of you is most wrong. I do declare I am afraid to say which worse behaves, the North imposing bonds on trade, or South that man enslaves." Looking at Punch cartoons, we see their use of caricaturization, a style that was critiqued in an article published by New York-based magazine The Nation in 1866. The article stated that, quote, "the essence of caricature is exaggeration to deformity," end quote, and concluded that, quote, "fairness and good nature are almost impossible in its practice," end quote. As modern viewers of Punch cartoons, we can also see how slaves were caricaturized, often in dehumanizing ways.
Punch Cartoons is notable for its caricature of Abraham Lincoln, who is always portrayed quite venomously no matter the comic featuring him. Whether motionless and paralyzed or overly active, Punch Lincoln is always emotive, an aspect often exaggerated to accentuate the apish appearance depicted by the Punch cartoonist. Worrisomely, this is likely an attempt to liken Lincoln to racist and animalistic depictions of black slaves, as there are only a few comics in which Lincoln is not paired with some depiction of a black American. Whether it is in a satirical attempt to depict Lincoln as uncaring of black lives, like in Rowdy Notions of Emancipation, as he is seen dejectedly lamenting the lynching of slaves without actually lifting a finger to aid them, or in order to accuse him of having ulterior motives, as seen in Abe Lincoln's Last Card, where Lincoln plays an ace of spades depicted with a black face against the Confederate, implying his emancipatory politics to be a disingenuous last-ditch effort to claim victory. Lincoln is never depicted as a liberator, or even sympathetic in any way. Meanwhile, in the visual depiction of slaves, is hardly any more positive, and they are almost always used in an ancillary role to emphasize the barbarity of Lincoln. Punch was a humor magazine, which promoted radical politics to the extent that their middle-class readership could stand palatable. Punch gained its popularity by catering to them, and as such, the few cartoons that did not depict Lincoln or the Confederates concerned international trade and economics, and always from the nationalist position of British superiority. Thus, as Punch catered to its readership, it in turn observed the Civil War through a principally middle-class British perspective, as did its readership.
The satirical cartoons in Punch magazine had an international impact which brought forth lasting effects on how the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln were viewed in the mid-19th century, as well as reinforcing racial stereotypes of African Americans. To see this, let's look at Scene from the American Tempest. In it, Lincoln is handing the slave the Emancipation Proclamation in exchange for his service in the Union Army in hopes that he will take up arms against the South. The Confederate South is shown in the background as a pouty teenager who doesn't like being told what to do, nor does it like having its things taken away. It is important to note that Lincoln is equally caricaturized here. The depiction of the Negro slave is typical of this time period, where blacks were made to look less than human and animalistic. Further, the language used to describe the slave and the language used by the slave to speak volumes as to the racist stereotypes of the day and the degradation of the Negro. This cartoon draws on a connection to Shakespeare's play The Tempest, which is also about class struggle, usurping of power, and slavery. In the allegory of this cartoon, the Negro is dehumanized and demoralized in the same manner as his mirror character Caliban in The Tempest. The use of stereotypical imagery is a recurring theme throughout media of the Civil War era in the United States and in Europe. Other examples of this would include More Free Than Welcome, One Good Turn Deserves Another, and is further evidenced in The Genuine Othello, Brutus and Caesar, as well as King Cotton. American media also used racist stereotypes in their depictions of the Negro, and their British media counterpart, and like their British media counterparts, American newspaper publications likewise made fun of Lincoln. Harper's Weekly, New York Illustrated, and Vanity Fair are a few of these media outlets. The South even emulated the British magazine Punch in 1863, naming it Southern Punch. In conclusion, viewing the Civil War through the satirical eye of Punch magazine presents a multidimensional approach which aids in understanding the Civil War apart from the vantage point of American exceptionalism. The lasting impressions and caricatures of Blacks permeated public consciousness, influencing the Jim Crow era and even through till today. All groups, all racial and ethnic groups in this country have been caricaturized, but none of them have been caricaturized as often and in so many ways as have their Africans and their American descendants.